have a brand new Ultra Legendary Brawler coming to Brawl Stars, and his name is Sirius. Today, I'm going to put him head-to-head with every brawler in Brawl Stars to find out just how good he's going to be. But first, let me tell you all about him. Sirius is the first true villain to come to Star Park. He once was a circus performer doing shadow puppetry, but once people got bored of his show and they moved on to new rides, that made him jealous, so he harnessed the power of the gems and learned to control brawlers' shadows. It's this power that makes him unique and gives him that ultra legendary status. He's classified as a controller brawler and has some really unique things in his kit. First off, at max level, he has 7,400 hit points, so the same as Charlie. Not a ton, but respectable. However, he does have a fast movement speed to give him some more mobility. For his main attack, he shoots two projectiles, one that travels in a straight line at long range, while the other is a thrown attack that deals area damage. Both of these attacks deal 1,200 damage each. You can even use him purely as a thrower with his star bombs being launched over walls. Of course, doing that, you only get half the damage that he can put out. Both his normal attack and the thrown attack will build up a shadow charge. You'll see a little indicator telling you how many shadows you have saved up. You can increase the rate at which these shadow charges build up by equipping his second star power called the Darkest Star. With this, each hit with a shadow strike will count as 2 hits instead of 1, which greatly increases the brawler shadows he has banked, but this is where the fun begins. His super automatically charges, and pretty fast too. If you have no shadow charges either banked or already on the field though, it'll be grayed out. But if you do have some banked, this is how you unleash and control them. If you just tap the super, it'll spawn your shadows right next to you and then they'll follow you around attacking nearby enemies. However, you can also drag and aim his super. Doing this will command the shadows to go to that target area and attack anything within that circle. They will stay there guarding that until you give them orders to do something else, which can be done just by retargeting that super that charges up really fast or tapping it and they'll come back to you. What's even more wild is that you can even build up more shadows. You can have up to 6 shadows on the field at the same time. You can even do things like spawning your first wave of shadows in the very back of the map and just having them stay there and they won't take any damage. And then once you build up more and the time is right, you can unleash 6 of these shadows at your target. And what's even more is that if you die, the shadows do not go away. They will continue to fight until they are defeated. But you can actually have even more control over the shadows in a couple of different ways. First off, you can control what type of shadows you summon. The shadows that you banked are determined by what brawler you're attacking. So if you want to spawn a bunch of Frank shadows, then focus your attacks on Frank. Then when you summon them, they'll be Frank shadows. Although a note about them is that they spawn with 70% of the original target's health and 55% of their damage. So they aren't like full-on brawlers, but I mean, yeah, they're merely their shadows. However, you can make these shadows stronger with a gadget or a star power. His first star power, called Dusk Runners, will increase the movement speed of the shadows by 15%. He also has a gadget that functions like Larry and Lori's gadget. It's called the Master of Shadows. When this is pressed, the shadows will return to Sirius and regain half of their health. Very wild. And then his first gadget actually spawns a single shadow. When pressed, it will fire a projectile and summon a shadow. It'll also slow a target if it hits it as well. His hypercharge in the dev build just says coming soon, but Brawl Stars already told us in Brawl Talk that by using his hypercharge then his super, it'll summon shadows that have more health and speed. So this brawler is going to be wild. But how does it stack up in base level interactions without his shadows? Well, that's what we're about to find out right now, starting with the artillery brawlers. Sirius can act as a thrower as well, but he also gets the extra shadow strike too. While his damage isn't vastly higher than most of these throwers, it is enough to propel him over the top even with the hard-hitting ones like Dynamite. Grom came close, but not close enough, and tick shots just take too long. Barley does make it a fight, but loses in the end. In a game, this is much closer than these tests suggest. And while yes, Sirius is going to do better than most other classes, Simply because he can act as a thrower, the damage with his single thrown shot is significantly weaker than the other true throwers because that's only half of his power. But the fact that he can throw over walls means that you can't just ignore him. The throwers, however, are going to have a vastly harder time once Sirius gets his shadows into the game. While all of these throwers deal splash damage, which is a big benefit with a swarm of shadows headed your way, they are still going to have to expend a ton of ammo to deal with him. And furthermore, if Sirius steals the shadows of other throwers, well then those shadows can and will attack from overwalls too. So without the shadows, it's advantage throwers. But after that, Sirius really starts pulling ahead. But what about brawlers that don't have splash damage? Let's find out how the Marksmen do. While Sirius has solid damage, his point damage is not nearly as potent as the Marksman, as Piper shows, although it is very close. He does manage to take out B, but Nani's damage overwhelms him. Him and Bonnie trade blows, but the higher hit points for Bonnie wins the day. Belle's damage is actually less than Sirius, and Mandy loses by just a couple of frames. Maisie has the health and the damage to win, but Angelo can't get off a second shot. Janet just gets overpowered, and finally Pierce loses in a close one. So 6 and 5 against a higher powered marksman is honestly pretty good. But what about in a game? This one is going to be tough. On one hand, if Marksman can keep Sirius away from them, then he won't really be able to land shots on them, so that is a huge advantage thanks to the range difference. However, it is going to be a miserable fight once Sirius gets his shadows onto the map. Just imagine this. You're an Angelo and you have 3 or more shadows coming your way. What are you supposed to do? You are going to get absolutely bullied out of position if you don't just outright die. And the same goes for other brawlers like Piper or Mandy, B, Maisie, and pretty much almost all of these brawlers. Janet at least can pierce the shadows, but this is a massive mismatch once the game rolls on if Sirius is not contained. You're going to need a lot of help from your teammates to not get dominated. Now, I can see this being a very bad matchup for the Marksmen in the late game, but they should do well early on. But what about brawlers that can deal with the shadows? Let's see how they do. We start off with Bull being Bull. Primo holds no punches back. Rosa takes longer, but does the same. A couple quick shots from Daryl, and it is over. Jackie slams the living shit out of him. Frank takes 4 shots, but it's not close. BB knocks Sirius out of the park. Ash takes out the trash. Hank made it a close fight, but still came out with a W. Trunk spins his way to victory. Buster busts the villain. Ollie, however, does less damage than Sirius and is the first to lose, but Meg, she avenges that loss by getting a win for the tanks. And finally, Draco shreds him. Seriously. So yeah, 1 and 13. Not a great record, but Sirius is a control brawler. Without his shadows, if a tank makes his way close to him, it's not much of a competition. They simply have too much power and too much health to be controlled. However, once Sirius has a super ready, it's going to get a lot tougher. While there are brawlers like Frank and Ash that won't have too many problems with the shadows, they will have to use up all their ammo to do it. However, other brawlers like Bull are going to take a couple full ammo bars just to get rid of them, all while they're probably taking damage, and if Sirius spawns them on top of himself to follow, then that once squishy target the tank was just going after just pulled a solo leveling act and raised his shadow army. You're going to go from full-on onslaught to survival mode real fast. Now that's not to say that these tanks can't handle it, but the entire situation will change in a hurry. That being said, if you're playing Sirius, I don't think it'd be in your best interest to go wandering around in the bushes when you think that there might be a tank in there. That is, unless you're locked, loaded, and ready to go with your backups, or else you might just be sent to the shadows yourself. At this close, it's not a fair fight, so let's match him up against the other control brawlers to make it even. So now we come to the same class as Sirius. Even though this class has a really wide variety of brawlers that deal damage at all ends of the spectrum, you'll notice that Sirius is holding his own pretty well. He might not have the fastest reload time of the brawlers, but his actual damage output is pretty darn respectable. His unload speed of his attacks is better than average, and his slightly higher health pool helps him a lot here too. The bottom line here is that At least in base level interactions, we are seeing that he belongs quite well in this class. Lou loses in a close one, and surprisingly, Otis even barely wins. Willow's damage just doesn't have time to build up, but Chuck steamrolls his way to victory. It's a close one with Charlie, but one last yo-yo gets a win. Finks would have won if the shots were aimed off-center, but I'm controlling each tablet with one hand. Aiming is like near impossible, so cut me some slack already. Sandy's damage isn't enough to get a win, and Amber gets sent straight to the shadows with that loss. So 10-9 against the same class. That's a pretty respectable score for a brawler that can do vastly more than just trade blows. However, with this class, it's also really hard to draw conclusions because there are just so many different brawlers. One thing to note though is that this class has a lot of brawlers that have piercing or splash damage, so they will be well suited to dealing with his shadow army. Penny can splash all of them, and Jessie will be able to bounce her shots. Amber and Chuck can burn them down, and the list goes on and on. This is a very even matchup, and what it comes down to in the end is who is the better player. And that's how it should be. There's not a lot of huge advantages either way, but what class will have an advantage? That's the Assassins, so let's see how they do. The Assassins are going to dominate. Okay, I see you, Sirius. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's more like what I thought was going to happen. Yeah, the Assassins were made for this sort of matchup. Control brawlers are like the appetizer they eat before they settle in for the main course. Sirius doesn't have nearly the burst damage to deal with brawlers like this. At least, not without his super. So it's no big surprise here to see him losing. Miko doesn't even break a sweat mopping the floor with him, and even Melody, with her slow wind-up, gets the dub. Lily pokes him with the sharp end of the stick a few times, and Allie beats him in about 1 nanosecond. Gigi dances her way to a win, but Crow's new buffies do nothing here as he is left holding the L. There's no way Leon loses when he's right next to somebody, but Cord makes it a very close fight. Kenji does take his sweet time to win this fight, but Kaze wastes no time in shutting the circus down. So yeah, 2-16. At least he got a couple of wins in there. As with almost every fight with the Assassins, it totally depends on if they get the drop on Sirius. If they do, then not only will it play out just like the tests, but probably worse. That being said, most Assassins don't deal with swarm units very well. Mortis is going to be running for the hills, hoping his team takes care of the shadows, and Crow will either have to pop a hypercharge with its new abilities, or fall back a lot as well. Sirius's ability to throw over walls might help a little, but most of these brawlers have a way to get around that quickly. So if you're playing an Assassin, pick your spot well, and you're going to gobble him up. But if you choose poorly, well then don't be surprised if you're running for dear life from the Shadow Swarm nipping at your heels. Unlike the next group, who can probably just blast those shadows to bits. Now you'd fully expect the damage dealers to wipe the floor with a control brawler, but when you're watching these interactions, you'll see that that's not really the case. Sirius is holding his own against the brawlers whose sole job it is to pump out a lot of damage and take down the strongest brawlers in the game. And the one he loses to, it's a close match, but Lola has the firepower to get it done. Pearl with full heat up close? No. Tara landing all of her cards? Again, no. Eve, however, he can for sure take down. Now he does lose to RT in normal form, but it's close. Clancy at stage 2 ends in a perfect tie. Mo didn't land enough pebbles, and Lumi, well, she just has too little health to survive. Even the powerhouse Mina dies just before Sirius does. Spike loses in a close fight, and Surge needed just a little more juice to win. Chester, however, erases Sirius for the win. So 9 wins, 9 losses, and 1 tie. Honestly though, kind of surprised. I really thought that he would do worse than this, but he kept pace with the damage dealers, and that's without utilizing his biggest strength. And that would be his shadows, of course. Much like the other classes, everything goes out the window with base level interactions when these shadows hit the field. Brawlers that can pierce and splash will have a much better time dealing with them. Those with single shot damage are in for a rough day, or will need to have their team really help them out, and maybe both. If a damage dealer has their super locked and loaded and Sirius does not, then this is not going to be much of a fight. The damage dealers will do what they were meant to do, but this matchup is anything but one-sided. However, let's take a look at a matchup that should be one-sided, and that's with the support brawlers. So then we are on to the last class before I give you my verdict on Sirius and how good I think he will be. But the support brawlers, aside from a couple of exceptions like Pam, are not the best at dishing out the damage and soaking up the hits. This is simply not what they were meant for, like poor Byron here. One day it'll be your day, just not today. I don't think that we should judge this group too harshly on not winning the majority of these interactions. They were meant to play with a team, and they don't get that luxury here. However, in a game, they will have a cast that will be able to help them out and handle that threat. But if you find yourself in a 1v1 situation with him in range, it might be a tough time for you. Globert needed just a second more and he would have finished the job. However, Kit now, he's down to 8 lives. So Sirius finishes with a 9-2 record versus the support brawlers, and overall a record of 45 wins, 54 losses, and 1 tie. For a control brawler not using his biggest threat, not bad. So then, how good will Sirius be? Will he live up to that Ultra Legendary title? In short, yes. Yes, he is going to be very strong, and I think that he is going to be a force to be reckoned with. He doesn't have many weaknesses outside of the lack of defense when he doesn't have his super ready to go. Other than that, this is a very well-rounded brawler that can do almost anything. The ability to summon an entire shadow army to do your bidding at the very minimum makes the enemy waste a ton of ammo, and that by itself is insanely strong. This is what makes Nita so good. Bruce doesn't have to deal any damage to be effective. Now imagine Bruce moves faster. He has ranged attacks and can have up to 6 of them on the field at the same time that are just a gadget away from being healed back up. Yeah, it's freaking nuts. By himself, Sirius might be a bit of a liability, not having a ton of defense, but once you get him rolling, it is going to snowball. Imagine putting all of your shadows on a safe and heist. They're gonna melt it. Want to guard an entire lane in gym grab? Sure, why not? Maybe even crazy things like hiding in the grass in Cavern Chart. That's not a good surprise to walk into. Bounty might be more of a struggle just because of his range, but if you can throw over wall, once you get the shadows built up, brawlers that are normally in Bounty will struggle greatly against multiple targets. The amount of pressure that this brawler will exert on the other team is going to be oppressive as heck. So yes, I think he is going to be very, very good. I'd rate him a 9 out of 10. This brawler is really strong. Maybe not like Larry and Lori release strong, but oh my gosh, he's going to be good. But how good will the other new brawler Nyjah be? Well, come back tomorrow and find out.